This build series follows my journey as a backyard restorer, resto modding a 1964 EH Holden panel van equipped with not only a 3.8 litre Commodore V6 engine, but also an independent front end, an independent rear end, and all the mod cons you'd expect from a true resto mod. All of this thanks to a promise I made to my dying father, ensuring that his last car that he started to restore got finished. So that brings me to what I think today's episode is going to be on, which is finishing off this back section here. Now, just before I go on, you might notice that there's a little bit of light going on in here. What I've actually done, I've gone to Amazon, and you get these hexagon lights that usually go on the roof of like the sheds and everything like that, so you sort of see them. What I've done is I've put a couple of magnets up there on each side, so it's joined up there, and then I've just put a couple of little bit of steel sheet on each of those, and then it's just sort of hanging there. So got plenty of light in here now. It's actually looks pretty bloody cool. And because I've now finished seam sealing underneath, and I've POR 15, like I've rust sealed all underneath there now, I don't need to access anything underneath the floor anymore. So I've just put a piece of Perspex on there just to try and prevent the dust and stuff from getting in there. I mean, it'll still get in there, but it's not as bad. So what I'm doing here is I've finished rust sealing all underneath these floor panels and seam sealing all that, anything that I can't get to again. So I finished all that now. So what I've done is I've made up, just folded up some sheet and put it in there. It'll go in there roughly, right? So I'm just going to now weld off at the top there, put some plug welds through here, and then weld off at the back here. And then what that'll give me then is that final sheet. Now, on factory, these come down straight here, then they kick out to give you that extra bit of room here in the sort of boot space. I'm going to keep it straight. I'm going to make it pretty simple. So I'm going to cut another little piece out there, which is where it starts to kick in that way. I'll cut that out. I'll put another piece in there just so that I can run a nice straight line down each side. As you can see, this is this side, right? So pretty simple, nice and straight. And then what it means is come time to do the floor paneling, I don't have to worry about, kicking stuff out or anything like that. My original plan, and I think I'm still probably going to stick to it, is to put in just some hardwood, like some, not Merbau, but, like some hardwood decking and, like give it a nice cherry finish and just a polished timber, and then I can just run the weather strips on that. I think that's probably what I'll stick to, but I've got options. I can either put in, one piece of stained pine, and I can put in the strips, or I can put in some, whatever. But it's going to be timber. That's the long and the short of it. It'll be a timber floor, which I think it'll go nice. So that's what I'm going to crack into today. So let's get into it. Okay, so we're finished, which is pretty cool. I think it's come up looking pretty bloody nice, to be honest. It's handy having a fuel tank hole that I can step into to show what's going on. Yeah, so you would have seen in the time lapse, just put in some plug welds through there, up through there, and then this bit here I was sort of playing around with how to finish all this off. I think what I'm going to do next now is I'm just going to run a little bit of seam sealer in and around through there. I've got to run a bit of seam sealer through here anyway. So I think I'll just finish all that up with a bit of seam sealer in both sides, and then that'll be fine. But yeah, job done. All right, so I thought I'd just show you what I'm working on at the moment, just to round out all of the welding that's going on in the car here before I go and paint underneath and before I epoxy in here, is just doing the final mounts for the center console. Now, I'd mocked this up when the tunnel was sort of just loosely put in place. But now I've got to make sure I've got the right mounts everywhere and everything like that in order for it to just bolt straight in. I can't be welding stuff off once everything's painted. So hence where we're up to now. So working through what I've done, I've put in a short pack. It's a vintage air short pack. It's AC, heater and defrost. Now, in order for it to pass roadworthy in engineering, we have to have the defrost function in there and that. And I like this because I can fit it all in behind, you know, like the center console piece like this. So it all stays hidden. So I've gone and mounted that up, and you would have seen me play around with the mock-ups and that. But effectively what I've done is I've put the drain hole out there, and then I've made up some little brackets just here and here. And that just bolts basically to the bottom of the dash panel here. And so that's in there nice and secure now. So that's its final resting spot, and everything all fits in there nicely. Obviously I'll play with the ducting and that later on. Now, what I was able to do when I sacrificed that VR Commodore, I basically pulled out all the center console. Now the plan is always to run the whole center console, right? So that way I can keep all the wiring as it is and everything just works. So what I've done is I've taken, this is the mounting piece that goes like for the stereo and for the AC controls and everything like that. And it's almost the main structural piece of the whole center console. Now, what I've done is I've taken this and I've made a few chops and whatnot. You can see through the chops. And then I've also gone and put on I've just welded on another mounting point there. So I've got a mount point there, and I've got a mount point here, which goes on the tunnel. So I'm just going to put that in place now, and then you'll see how it all comes together. Okay, so that's nice and sturdy in there. And as I said, this forms the main centerpiece of the mounting point here, because if you look at this, all the mounting points here, right, they all line up. Now, initially, what I'd tried to do was use the complete VR center console, right? So if I just put that in place there, okay, that all roughly looks like it goes into place, okay? Now, the difference is, so this is what a standard center console looks like, right? It's got all this plastic at the top here, down the sides. So this is where the glove box bolts onto, and then this is where the kick panel goes for that. If I put that in place there, it's sort of half okay, but as you can see, I've got a big gap here, like, you know, there's probably a good 20 mil gap there, which is, yeah, I could probably build that out in foam and make that work, but I just wasn't happy with that look. And as you can see, it sits back a fair way. Now, the other consideration to put in place is that whatever I do, wherever that goes, that has to line up. So this is the gearbox position selector, right? So if I left that there, the park doesn't line up, right? So it's not in the right spot, right? So that's the long and the short of it. It's just not in the right spot. So all this considered, what I've had to do, now luckily, so that was the one out of the VR. Luckily, Dad kept the one out of the VP. So I've got two lots that I can play around with. Now, initially what I'd done is when I was originally mocking it up, I actually cut this one in half, right? Because I was planning on maybe just using this panel here because I can get the gear selector and everything right. And then I just run without a center console pouch and that there. So I'd cut it in half. But then as I was playing with it, I was working out that every time I would move this way, then that would go that way and actually pull it further away from the dash. So if I went this way, it brings it closer to the dash, right? But then the gear selector is then too high, it then can't get into first gear. So it's that real fine balancing adjustment to go, right, I need to have this low enough to be able to get to first gear, but I need to have it high enough to be able to get into, that closest to the dash as possible. So these are all the considerations. And I guess this is why people just use custom center consoles and build them out of MDF and everything like that. But I don't know, I just wanted to try and persist with this. So where did I get to? Right. What I'd done is, again, I'd left it in two pieces. I'd actually got so if I just put it in place now, I've just got a little screw that holds that one in there. So I've made up a little angle piece in here, which is sort of the brace for this part, right? Then I played around with so there's height sensing screws here. So there's two height sensing screws that I can either lift or bring down this part of the console itself. So now if I look at that, I can put my piece in place like this, right? And guess what? I've got my right gear selectors when I put it in the right spot, right? So I've got that in its right spot, right? So that's all fine. So then got that. Then I can put my console in place, put that into there. And then once that bolts up into that piece that I just put in, I've got a nice gap there. So that there, I've only probably got about a 5mm gap, which is perfect because that allows for a little bit of movement. And also this will just be finished off nice and flush and that. So the last part was then trying to join the two. So then I basically made like a little panel, just a little piece of steel in there, and then just screwed that to the actual panel itself, to the center console. Just ground those ends of those screws back. And then what I actually did is I used a bit of seam sealer. Now, all this is going to be covered anyway in when it gets reupholstered. So all this will be covered anyway, so I don't really mind that I've got a bit of seam sealer in that there. But it's sort of structural enough to glue it together, but still flexible enough to allow a little bit of movement while I'm putting it in and everything like that. And then I've just welded up like a little mount point here. So I've got two mount points that go into the actual tray itself. I've got the mount point there and then all the mount points here. And then I've got a nice center console that does its job. So the last job on all of this now is to integrate the instrument cluster into the EH hole here, and then work out what I'm going to do here. Now, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to weld up all of these holes. So this is obviously for the ignition and the lights and the choke and wipers and etc. etc. I don't need any of that anymore. Because it's all on the actual, I'm using all the Commodore stuff. So yeah, I'm just going to weld these up. But then I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in a new panel just to blank all that off. And then I reckon I'll run the aircon louvers up there. So I reckon that's probably going to be my spot for that. Now I'm mulling over whether I put in the original Commodore trip computer. So this is the module that then talks to the cluster to be able to give me, fuel mileage and stuff like that. Is it a bit of a wank? I don't know, but I've got the wiring there. So I think if I'm going to put it anywhere, I'll put it here, right? And I'll put it in between the louvers, the aircon louvers. And then the other thing that I was mulling over as well is whether I put another set of louvers on the outside here or whether they're just enough. I think they'll be just enough for what I want it for. Because I'll hide the window down in it anyway, if I need to. But yeah, anyway, I'll play with that later on. The biggest thing is the cluster. So the original cluster bolts here, and it also bolts to the top of this, and it goes into that. Now, going across to what I've got, so as you can see, this is the original cluster, so it bolts there, and then it also bolts there and there. Now, this is the VR cluster, which I've pulled apart because, and this is thanks to Scott, who's on one of the Facebook groups that I follow on the EH ones, so shout out to him. What he'd done many years ago is he'd made up basically a custom cluster. So that sort of sits factory about there, right? And as you can see, it sits way forward than what it does on factory, on the EH, sorry. So what I'm going to have to do is sort of modify it and make it a bit narrower, right? Which therefore means I'm going to have to chop this off, and therefore I'm going to have to redo all of this because this is all the warning lights and then all this. So there's just a lot of thinking and headaches that I've got to go through with this. So I don't know if I'll document that. I think I'll just come up with a solution for it and then talk you through the steps of it when I figure it out. Because there's a lot of thinking that's got to go. But effectively, I've got to make this cluster fit into that. Now, if I look at this without that, I'll take this over, roughly it fits in there, right? So roughly, I can get it to fit, right? So I can play around with how it sort of sits and everything like that. And then what I'm thinking is I might make up like a piece that goes over the top, which will then bolt to there, and then use these mounting points and make like a little bracket to go back to there. So that sort of mounts in place and can be mounted there. And then I'll just have to think about what I'm going to do with the dash pad in terms of chopping this out and re-molding it in order to be able to make the little provisions for the warning lights. So this is what the original cluster would have, is it has like little peak holes there for the warning lights. So I've got to work out how I'm going to do that within that. And then I can make that dash work. There's a bit going on with that, so I think I'll come back to that one another time, but that's sort of where I've been playing at the moment. All right, so the next job is to clean up the dash. So what I'm going to do is, because I don't need any of these lights and everything like that, all the holes here, I'm going to weld up these ones, and I'll blank them in, leave the little dots out there, that's fine. But in here where the original stereo goes, this is where I'm going to run my vents for my aircon. Now, I'd sort of had a thought, I'm like, I could just put a flat piece of plate in there and that'd be fine. But at the same time, once this is all painted, there's like a little groove, a little scallop out in the dash itself. And I think if I put a flat panel over that, it's sort of probably not going to look that great. Now, fortunately, Dad had this blanking plate which goes over the original stereo cover, right? He's obviously picked this up from a build or two in the past. What it's done is it's given me a profile to be able to sort of make a piece on. So what I've done is I've gone and used a bit of RHS, so it's 50 by 25. And I've cut out a section in the guts of it there, right, at the same profile as that, so that flat piece there can sit, you know, in there, and then that piece there will go onto that. Then I got a bit of round bar, and then I just chucked it in the press, pressed it down, and got a profile. So it needed a little bit of extra shaping, so putting it straight down the guts there, it sort of bent it a little bit. So what I did is I did a bend there, and then I sort of slightly tilted it a little bit more, did another one, and then did another one, which then got me my perfect sort of round. Then I put it in the folder, folded out a couple of little lines there, which then, as you can see now, fits perfectly with that profile. So what it means is that I can now cut out this section here. I'm going to go to about there. So that's that section there. Put that in there like that. And then I've basically blanked out that entire section there. It'll look custom, it'll look factory. And then it just gives me the ability to now chop the holes where I want.